So this probably seems like kind of a dead horse point to make. But I think it's worth making because whenever I argue with friends or family or strangers who are like really big election fraud 2020 truthers, oddly enough, one of the most common points that comes up when I'm arguing with them is this idea that just the sheer disbelief that Joe Biden possibly could have won because he's old or because his brain isn't good or because he didn't campaign enough or because of his like background as someone who like worked with segregationists 30 years ago or some combination of all those things. And personally, I was kind of expecting him to win in 2020, and I say that as someone who predicted Trump's victory in 2016. And, it's not like I put a lot of money on the thing, but, I mean, I bet a pint of beer with my friend, and that was that. But, so I want to go into, why I felt like this time if you gave me $100 and said I had to put on one of them, I would have put it on Joe Biden and not Donald Trump. And first of all, I want to grant that I'll grant two things. One is that it is very difficult to beat an incumbent when you look at presidential elections in the US. There's not that many instances of an incumbent losing. And even a lot of those instances are either a case of having a strong third party challenger or being challenged from within their own party. So, if history shows anything, it shows that being an incumbent is a huge advantage. And more than that, it would seem that Biden's strategy for beating this incumbent is not one that historically tends to work. Historically, it seems like it's usually not a winning strategy to run as a referendum on the other party or the other candidate. Um, Typically, it's having a bold vision, having, an agenda that really excites a base. Usually, that's the thing that gets people out to the polls, that gets people fired up, that galvanizes people. So those are two things you definitely have to grant, and that's why I wasn't feeling super confident one way or the other going into this election cycle. But here's the thing. You have to realize in 2016, Donald Trump had a famously unpopular opponent, and he still really only won by not a huge margin. It was really, couple tens of thousands of votes in a couple different states could have swung it the other way. So, you know, famously unpopular opponent and still barely won. So it's kind of an unusual incumbent. This can't necessarily be expected to follow the pattern that every other election follows. So I was kind of looking at that and thinking, whoever wins the Democratic primary going into 2020 is probably going to run a better campaign than Clinton ran in 2016, just because, and this isn't going to be like an anti-Clinton video, but her 2016 campaign was not a very effective campaign. I think most people probably get that. Whoever won in 2020 2020 would probably run a better campaign than she did. They would probably learn their lesson about a lot of things. Um, in addition to just not coming with as much baggage. The other thing I noticed, and this was a decisive point, is if you really follow sort of the grassroots left in the United States, if you really follow a lot of far left political commentators, there was a pretty staunch kind of opposition to Clinton on the grassroots left in 2016 in a way you didn't really see in 2020. You felt a very real sense in 2016 from a lot of progressives and social democrats and democratic socialists and people who are just kind of vaguely in that sort of category, people who are big Sanders supporters, that the way she sort of treated their movement, it was like, if she cracks the whip now and we get back in line, we'll never win anything ever again. You really didn't see that to anywhere near the same extent in 2020. Maybe there's a little bit of it, but it seemed fairly certain it was going to be less of a factor. Now, on top of that, when you look at the Trump campaign and what they were doing in 2016 versus 2020, I think Kyle Kulinski has made this point a couple times over the summer. It was like this whole kind of Trump's strategy for attacking Clinton in 2016 was pretty well calculated to have a pretty broad appeal. It was, she's corrupt, she's part of the establishment, she was for the Iraq War, she'll outsource your job. A lot of that kind of stuff that it resonated with a pretty broad swath of the population. Trump, a couple things. He never really had the same he never really had a strategy for attacking Biden that was like a bullseye in that respect. It never seemed like there's a coherent, this is the plan of attack, these are the talking points. And honestly, just looking at his campaign in general, and I got to confess, I didn't watch anywhere near as many Trump rallies in 2020 as I did in 2016. Going up to 2016, I probably watched at least 70 of them. But from what I saw, it seemed like the 2016 was very much is very well calculated to appeal to the base. It didn't feel like it was well calculated to appeal to that chunk of the population that really could go one way or the other in any given cycle. And that probably cost him. But on top of all of those things, turnout. It's like the Democratic Party always benefits when there's higher overall turnout. And aside from the fact that mail-in voting makes it easier to vote, I don't think I'd ever seen a more aggressive, just general get out the vote campaign, get out the vote kind of energy all over the place wherever you looked in 2020. I don't think I've ever seen that in my lifetime. Like literally everywhere. Like I've been a football fan like my whole life, and I don't think I've ever seen the NFL being as aggressively pro voting as they were in 2020. And on strictly speaking, that's not like a partisan thing, but the effect usually tends to help one candidate more than the other. So, yeah, take all those things together. To me, it seemed like more likely than not Biden was going to win in 2020, and that's why it seems really strange when I'm talking to these election fraud 2020 truthers, and they're like, "No, that's impossible." It's like, it's really not. And there's a lot of interesting aspects to that too that you can look back on. Um, like why wasn't Joe Biden's past more of a liability? Why wasn't the fact that I think as Trump put it, he'd appeared at funerals of all these segregationists to give orations. Um, the stuff Kamala Harris most notably was killing him on at the first couple debates. Why didn't that turn off more voters? Why wasn't that a bigger problem? And there's a lot of ways of looking at that, but why didn't his opponent make it more of an issue? You know, it's very possible that as the summer went on, as the whole issue over pulling down statues versus leaving them up became an issue, including these Confederate monuments, that something would have seemed very awkward about talking about how we need to keep these monuments up, and then the next second attacking Biden for being too close to the people that wanted to put up these monuments in the first place, you know? It's a possibility. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say about that.